And so here you have a president who won't even dare talk about Julian Assange. At least Trump would acknowledge it, even though he didn't do shit about it. But now you really have to wonder if a lot of the nefarious behaviors that have been going on over the past couple of years have to do with the fact that President Biden has more or less not been in charge. You also have to wonder what's going to happen going into next year. Is the Julian Assange issue going to become a campaign issue again? As of right now, you have RFK, Marianne Williamson, and Dr. Cornel West are the only three candidates who have brought up explicitly saying that we will free Julian Assange, or we will drop the charges against Julian Assange, should we be commander-in-chief. Now, of course, one would make the argument that the odds of either one of them becoming president are slim to none. So it's easy enough to say that if a viable candidate were to step up and say that Assange should be freed, I don't know how significant an issue you guys think that's going to, a role that's going to play in the election next year. I would be curious to hear if you guys do think that that will be big, especially in lieu of the backdrop that we're dealing with right now with Ukraine. And the louder and louder the voices get to end the wars, we're done with the forever wars in America.
Well, I think there's part of the population that do not like to see us engage in these endless wars that kill so many people, displace so many people, and then drain the resources of Americans and sending money, billions of dollars, 150 we're up to now. 150 billion in so-called aid to Ukraine, where it's actually going to arms manufacturers and others. So I don't think the American people are up for this again. And so I think that certainly could become an issue in campaigns. The American people have so many misconceptions about Julian. I'm hoping that some of these candidates will set the record straight. You probably are aware of the March article in Harper's by Andrew Coburn, where he began to debunk many of the smears that have been spread about Julian using testimony from witnesses at the trial. Julian was the one who was insisting on redacting names. It was David Lee and Luke Harding of The Guardian who exposed the password to the unredacted State Department cables. This was after Julian had already worked with the New York Times, Washington Post, Der Spiegel, papers around the world to redact names and publish those. It was David Lee. So that redaction occurred in beginning in November of 2010. David Lee and Luke Harding exposed the password as a chapter heading in their book. How arrogant is that? That, I believe, was in February of 2011. Julian then began to work trying to make sure that anyone whose name might appear would know and have, be safe. And it was actually John Young of Cryptome who published the unredacted cables in the United States on September 1st, 2011. And he testified at the trial. He submitted an affidavit saying he did so and that no one ever came to tell him to take it down or to arrest him. And it was only after Cryptome had published and other sites were publishing that Julian decided on September 2nd of 2011 to publish them in order to warn any others whose names were out there now who did not realize their names were out there, and to prevent forgeries. So that's, the American people need to understand what evidence, the importance of evidence. Just like Darnella Frazier taking the video, she was able to, with that video of, unfortunately, of course, the death of George Floyd, change the narrative. And it's really important, I think, for us to change the narrative and get these things out there.
Who do we think, ultimately, at the end of the day, is the person who really decides what Merrick Garland and the DOJ is going to do here. Like, at the end of the day, I mean, I question whether or not it's Biden. I don't know exactly who's really in charge of this in particular and advising him on this. But I feel like that's the person that we need to really be kind of focused on. I'm not entirely sure who that is. Like, is it Merrick Garland? Is it, is somebody else whispering in Joe's ear? I mean, that's the thing. Who is it?
We could ask Bill Burns, the CIA director, to no longer engage in this. That might not be the most stupid thing, other than the fact that Bill Burns is a victim of WikiLeaks because his cables exposed that the U.S.-NATO alliance was encircling or encroaching upon Russia and was agitating them. And, I still believe it's a preemptive war and a war of aggression against Ukraine. But that being said, those cables from the U.S. State Embassy cable cache that Manning gave to Assange and WikiLeaks really do show a lot of the backstory of how just U.S. government officials were going against every foreign policy expert that advised them, including esteemed ones who really do believe in what we could call the American Empire Project. They had said, well, this is kind of suicidal to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing up to the border. It's going to force Russia into a corner, and they're going to act, and they're going to do something to defend their territory, or that they claim is a defense of their territory. And to, they want to maintain that buffer zone. They want Ukraine to remain that buffer zone between Russia and NATO. And that is what we're seeing, is that they are and if it takes 5 or 10 years, they're fine. We act like that's the trap, like we're setting the trap. No, I think we're the ones that are going to have to expend more energy and resources to support all those people abroad, much like we had to expend that energy and resources to support the occupation of Iraq. So I don't know who's really setting a trap here. This country actually borders Russia. It's not too hard for them to have forces there in this bordering country. But I think, Bill Burns, because to me, the CIA wants their pound of flesh. They want Julian Assange, and they're not going to let the Justice Department prosecutors drop these charges. Something changed. I mean, I really think it's important for people to recognize the political reality. Something changed within that National Security Division of the Justice Department. I've been covering this for the whole of 10 years. That article that Ann met, not to toot my horn, but Andrew actually wrote about me and the book that I wrote, Guilty of Journalism, and just documented the work that I was doing that has been completely different than the way that other media outlets have chosen to approach Assange. And so one of the things that I know is back in 2013, we had some of these, we had this one article that was covering what was going on internally around the question of, after Manning, are we going to charge Julian Assange? And Attorney General Eric Holder was in the position at that time. And there was a disagreement. I think that there was some kind of a disagreement, but ultimately their consensus came to, well, there's this issue. If we charge Julian Assange, we really believe that we're going to have to go after some New York Times editors because they were involved in publishing this same information. So they really took seriously this. Now, if you look at the Yahoo News report that came in 2021 that revealed from over 30 sources that there was some plotting going on to kidnap or kill Julian Assange from the Ecuador embassy in London, what we find there is that Barack Obama actually authorized a kind of taking off of the gloves for the CIA to go and, search, and okay, they're helping Edward Snowden now. I think we can maybe change our minds or about whether they should be treated like a media organization anymore. They helped Snowden flee Hong Kong, so go ahead and go do what you would like. But ultimately, it's the Vault 7 materials in 2017 that make that turns the Christian right-wing fanatic, the end times lunatic that is Mike Pompeo. It unleashes him. He uses his first speech to call out WikiLeaks. He attacks Julian Assange. The speech is all about WikiLeaks. This is the first speech as CIA director. And then from then on, it's like his obsession. It's his obsession to go after and get Assange removed from the Ecuador embassy, to apply pressure to Ecuador to revoke the asylum that had been granted to Julian Assange. So I think maybe Bill Burns might be the one, because you're right. I don't think Merrick Garland's going to do anything, or I don't think the National Security Division is going to abandon it, or I don't think Tony Blinken at the State Department feels that anything is happening that violates press freedom or human rights. Even as his job has become more difficult at some of these Latin America summits, when Lula in Brazil or AMLO in Mexico says and demands that the charges be dropped against Julian Assange. So maybe those are the people. But I also think that for activists throughout the country, this is one thing I want to make sure I get in before we wrap, is that everyone has Congress people in their district. There are only 7 Congress people who signed on to a letter urging the Justice Department to drop charges. And it was actually missing some Republicans who didn't want to be on there because they're actually racist scum who didn't want to be on there with like Ilhan Omar and other people. So like go lobby your Congress people, even the ones that have been outspoken, especially if they're like Freedom Caucus members who have claimed to support Julian Assange. Ask them to sign onto it with progressives and stop being tribalists, and get on there and demand it, so that there can be this kind of like transpartisan opposition in Congress, and inform them. Because I think there was a poll done just like a year and a half ago that found that about half the country doesn't even know who Julian Assange is as a person. Like, he's just faded. Like, people don't have any idea. We're all worked up about him. We and there's a lot of propaganda about him, but there's also half the country that doesn't know any of this propaganda that gets us worked up and angry. So that's an opening. It's an opening for me. It's an opening for Ann. It's an opening for both of you to do something. I think we need to confront people. So like here in Illinois, I would go after Dick Durbin. I would go after my local congressperson is Jan Schakowsky. I mean, it would be important to like write to them and say, like, what are you doing? Up in Wisconsin, there are people who should be lobbied. I mean, look, Ron Johnson wants to act like he's some freedom of expression hero as he invites Matt Taibbi to the Hill. Great. Come on. Prove it. Stand up for Julian Assange. Maybe get Jim Jordan involved. Maybe Jim Jordan and his loud mouth can support Julian Assange. I don't know, but I think like we have to start working our Congress people and get them to say something, because the difference between our country and the UK and Mexico and Australia and Brazil and these other countries that you hear about, but really the ones that are most important are the UK, Australia, and the US. The difference is they have parliamentarians there and we don't here in the US. There aren't people in our Congress that are engaged, but there are people in parliaments in the UK and Australia who have spoken up. And actually the Prime Minister in Australia has said that he wants this to end so Julian Assange can come back home. So what do we need to do? We've got to start making people in Congress uncomfortable.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.